Greetings, students. Today we're going to be talking about Chapter 7, Risk Management. Perhaps one of the most difficult things a project manager can do is identify risks and how to minimize them. So our unit outcomes are to understand through discussion how risk management and risk mitigation are part of a project. And then we're going to define project risk. Risk management, which recognizes the capacity of any project to run into trouble, is defined as the art and science of identifying, analyzing, responding to risk factors throughout the life of a project and in the best interest of its objectives. This directly quote came from page 243 in your textbook. So a project risk can have positive and negative consequences. Opportunities and threats. With the Samsung Note 7 that was described in your textbook, the risk associated with their new battery, which was thinner but ran hotter, was something that could have been mitigated if they had gone outside the company to have their batteries tested. But they were in a hurry to market because they wanted to beat Apple. And at that time, Samsung controlled most of the market for cell phones. So opportunities, so that one had negative consequences. But what about opportunities? What if a problem team member leaves in the midst of a project? Certainly, this could have negative consequences, but the individual was a problem for the team and the project manager, so it could be an opportunity to hire somebody new or for a team member to take that opportunity and step into that person's place. So the consequences are not always negative. Event risk is the probability of an event times the consequences of the event. And there are many ways your book points out how to calculate the risk factor of a project. So there are some questions that need to be asked when we're looking at evaluating project risk. What is likely to happen, the probability and impact, and how are we going to find that out? What can be done to minimize the probability or impact of these events? What cues will signal the need for such action? What clues should I be actually looking for? And what are the likely outcomes of these problems and my anticipated reactions? So once again, lots for a project manager to have to be able to manage. If we look at our total project lifespan, we see time going forward from planning to production. And if you'll notice that the risk is increasing on the left, and at the planning phase and the development phase, both opportunity and risk are very high. But the combined risk impact in those two phases is low. And the amount at stake is low because we have not put many resources into the project at this point. But look at the combined risk impact go up as we move through the execution and finish stage. So that's the period of highest risk impact. And the dollar value has gone up, but the opportunity has gone down when we get to the finish stage because we're done with the project. So risk management is a four-stage process. First of all, we have risk identification. Those fall into some categories like financial, technical, commercial, execution risk, what are the unknowns, and contractual or legal risk. And there are common types of risks that occur in almost every project. Absenteeism, employees resigning, staff being pulled away by management, and so on. These risks are associated with most projects. To identify and analyze the probability and consequences of risk, brainstorming sessions can be held within the project team. Expert opinion comes into play, and then perhaps most importantly, historical documents from prior projects can be reviewed. Then we have our risk mitigation strategies that we're going to talk about a little bit more. And as I said, we have the control and documentation for our risk management from previous projects. So we know about our WBS, a work breakdown structure, and we also are going to find something very similar in a risk breakdown structure. And RBS is defined as a source-oriented grouping of project task risk that organizes and defines the total risk exposure of the project. And that comes from page 248 in your text. So it's just like a work breakdown structure where we take the work and divide it into smaller bites called tasks as we move through the project. And the same thing happens with risk management or the risk breakdown structure. We've got our external risks, and we bring them to level 2, which are the market risk and then the environmental impacts. And then at level 3, we have the risk of customer acceptance, the profit potential, the pollution risk, and community protest. This brings to mind the pipeline in North Dakota. That project has been going on for years, and there was good profit potential. However, there's a pollution risk, and there's been many community protests. And I noticed the other day that now the project has been stopped. Then we have our internal risk. We have at level 2, the technical risk. Is it going to be technically possible? And then the organizational risk associated with the hierarchy of the project team, and the functional organization. Then our technical leads us to level 3, which is performance. And organizational, it would be the funding, safety, and the skilled resources. And then we're going to talk about risk mitigation strategies. This is going to be a big part of your discussion post this week. There are things that we can do to minimize risk. We can simply accept the risk, like in the recording industry your book mentions, where only 5% of albums are actually profitable, yet millions of albums are recorded every year. So it's very high risk, but with musicians and the passion of their music, it's worth the risk to them to try. Then we can minimize the risk. As I said, Samsung could have done this by using an outside source to test their batteries, and they would probably still have a large share of the market for cell phones. But they were in a hurry to go to market and use internal resources that probably weren't fairly testing those batteries. We can share the risk, and one thing that comes to mind recently is the shared risk that NASA and SpaceX have taken on to send astronauts to the space station. Then we can transfer that risk. For example, fixed price contracts for minimizing cost overruns can be used to transfer the risk back to the client. Then we have contingency reserves, setting aside a portion of the budget to cover risks. So, for example, if we're at a task contingency level, we have the tax estimated cost times the task contingency multiplier. So if our expected cost is $10,000, we multiply that by 1.2, then we've got $2,000 in reserve for risk. Then at the project level, we've got managerial contingency. What if in the middle of a project, the scope radically changes? This contingency fund can be used for just such a problem, or perhaps the project will fail. Often used in the construction industry is insurance. Then we have workarounds. I've seen this a lot in the software industry. The PMBOK defines this as response to a threat that has occurred for which a prior response has not been planned or was not effective. And the book talked about how the workaround came about when a hospital got an interface that was not user-friendly and was clumsy. And the customer actually came up with a workaround. Then we have other ways of mitigating risk. We can have mentoring on the project team, where one project team member, maybe with more experience, mentors another project team member. We can also have that mentoring between the project team and the client. And then cross-training is a way to minimize risk, because if you've only got one person that can do something, then you've put all your eggs in one basket, and it can be bad and hard on the project if that particular person leaves. So, we've talked about risk management and risk mitigation, and we've defined project risk. And you will have a good discussion to do this week. I hope you enjoy it. I will enjoy reading your answers. As always, all these slides come from your textbook, and I want to warn you, they're an overview. You need to be sure you're reading the entire chapters. Have a great day.